Thank you so much for joining us today, our webinar on how to lead a data walk. First, we're going to quickly introduce the Kelvin team. My name is Ari. I'm part of the sales and education team over here at Kelvin. I'm really excited to see you all here today. I'm super passionate about SEL, and I'm going to throw it over to Holly to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Holly. I'm one of the CSMs here at Kelvin, and I will pass it over to Justin because you'll get to hear from me very soon.
Hello, everyone. I am Justin, and I am also on the CSM team. And I'm going to pass over to Jimmy. Oh, Jim, you're muted.
Hey, everybody. I'm Jimmy. I'm going to be manning the chat line. And I'm a former educator myself, 16 years in the classroom, and welcome. I'll pass it over to Jill.
Hi, hello, everybody. Glad to see you all. I'm Jill, and I'm part of the CSM team as well.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And thank you so much, everyone, for being here. And with the Kelvin Sales, Education, and CSM team. And we are really excited to be learning with you all today. We're going to go next. And in true SEL and Kelvin spirit, we're going to be starting in with a check-in. Now, we've done something a little bit different over here. We are inviting. And if there's no one from the audience who want to come up, that's 100% understandable. But if there is anyone from the audience who would like to volunteer, and we'll quickly pop you up on the screen, promote you to a panelist who would like to share what or who inspired you to get involved in education. Please raise that virtual hand now, or post in the chat that you'd like to come up. We're going to give you a moment. And if no one wants to come, we're going to hand over to Jim to answer this question. So anyone from our attendees who would like to join and come up on screen, that would be fantastic. We're going to give it a good 10 seconds, and then, yeah, we'll see. So let's see if anyone's brave enough. I don't like being this person, but, so I totally get it if you don't want to. But if there's anyone who'd like to volunteer from the audience, it's your last chance to let us know. Okay. I guess I totally get it. But let's go over to Jimmy over here from our team. Jim, can you please share with us what or who inspired you to get involved in education?
Yeah, thanks, Ari. I'll just make it really quick. Tragically, when I was in high school, I had a cousin who took his own life, and it kind of, and we were the same age. We were both 17, and through that experience, I learned a lot about, your mental health and wellness. And I, kind of inspired me to become a teacher. I was an elementary school teacher for 10 years, and just trying to help kids, have a good time in school and make it fun learning environment. So that's the kind of teacher I was. And yeah, it also inspired me to work for Kelvin because the socio-emotional aspect of what happened back in 1987, helping kids now and school districts just help students' well-being. Not that we're a suicide prevention or anything like that, but just the wellness and the connectedness of the student in relationships with the schools. That's why I work here, but become a teacher, that was a turning point in my life. So yeah.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing, Jim. We really, really appreciate it. And that's quite an emotional story and a beautiful story. And thank you for sharing a part of us, because every single time I hear that story, it just really touches me. So we really appreciate you sharing. And that's really the power of a check-in. We just learned so much about Jim and who he is. And that's really, hopefully what you can use Kelvin for is checking in with your students and hearing their stories. So thank you so much for sharing your story with us, Jim. We really appreciate it, and for being vulnerable with everyone. Fantastic. So today, we are going to dive into how to lead a data walk. Feel free if there are any questions to pop them in the chat, and we'll get to them. But first, I want to share with you what Kelvin actually does. Kelvin helps you gather data, understand that data, and take action. That's what we are about, that gather, understanding, and action. And today what we're going to be focusing on is not so much the gathering part, which is how to kind of build your pulse surveys, but rather the understanding and the action part, how you can also how you can understand that and, you know, move the needle to take next steps. So really our two goals over here is we want to equip you with the tools and skills to, number one, understand Kelvin Pulse reports so you can present the data in a human-friendly way. That's what it is about, explaining it in a human-friendly way to understand that these are real people with real emotions. It's not just data. And so we want to help you do that. And number two, learn how you can present the data to share a story and take action. We want you to share that story, just like Jim told his story, and help take action, just like Jim has done. So we are super excited to be a part of this, and you know, just to kind of give you a framework, almost like an agenda of what we're going to try to help you achieve today is, you know, a successful data walk looks like this. And we've come up with the idea of EARN, this little mnemonic of it engages. Number one is that you want to engage the people who are in your data walk. You want to involve them, and we're going to look at some practical tools how you can do that. You want to share the reports in a way that's understandable, the relevant and real reports, which can share that story. And lastly, is you want to think of next steps or have some next steps for people to implement. So this is really what we're going to try to show you how to do today. We are not the final say. Please feel free to chip in with any thoughts as we go along, but we're really excited to learn with you. I'm going to pass over to Holly to share her screen to go and take over and discuss a couple more ideas. Thank you, Holly.
Thanks, Ari. So before we get going into framing your data walk, we wanted to talk about 3 considerations that will help you set up a successful data walk. So first off is the who. So you really want to think about who your data walk audience is, because that can vary by what position or role you're in, whether you're a district leader who is leading or taking reports before a district level meeting, versus a principal leading an all staff meeting, or maybe you're a counselor and you're leading an SEL team meeting. So in that case, you really want to think about who your audience is, and that will inform the next question, the what. So what information, what reports are you focusing in on? And we'll try to give you some helpful tips and ideas along the way. And as Ari said, we're not the final say. We're not prescribing how to do it, but we want to give you some inspiration for how you might take this back to your own district or your own schools. And then lastly, empathy. And this one is really important to us at Kelvin. We think that it's so easy for us to forget about the people and focus in on numbers and percentages, but it's really important to remember the people behind the data that gave you that information and are informing the decisions that you're going to make. So before you begin to work on a data walk, approach that data with empathy, prepare your co-leaders, your staff, your teachers to look at the data with empathy as well, and also bring that same empathy for your staff that you're bringing back that feedback to, because it can be difficult to receive some of those, some of the data points that might not be as positive as you had hoped for. But remember that we're all in this with the same goal in mind, and it would be helpful to remind your team what that shared goal is, what your vision is for your district or for your school. So that said, we want to kick off with some practical tips of how you might engage folks in your own data walk. So the first 2, leaderboard and glows and grows, I'm going to get to in just a moment, but I do want to briefly touch on the stakeholder input, and that is getting your students and community involved to have them help you solve those problems that you identify from the data that you're receiving from your Kelvin reports. I'll give you one real life example, and we've talked with one of our counties that actually has a student board member for their county board, and that student leads panels or leads actually roundtable discussions with other students and the community, and they bring up real-time issues and get to come together as both the student and also the community voice to come to an understanding and also talk through some of those real-time issues that they may have been just collecting quantitative data on from their Kelvin reports. And this can expand beyond the Kelvin reports, but this is another way that you can engage your stakeholders. And then the other two are leaderboards and our glows and grows. So we like to engage in a little friendly competition and also to celebrate accomplishments. And then the glows and grows to assess positives and negatives that you might be seeing in the data. So let's go ahead and jump into our leaderboards. So what we have done at Kelvin with a couple of our counties is to create the leaderboards to celebrate successes. And let me go ahead and show you how that might look in your actual data walk. So what we did is took two categories to celebrate. So we looked at the participation of surveys and then the overall favorability. So we're measuring participation by the percent of total participants that actually responded to each survey. And then for overall favorability, if you are familiar with using Kelvin, then this term hopefully is familiar to you, that we calculate the percent of favorable responses for all questions. So what we did for that, we looked at just the overall favorability, but you could by all means decide to look by category, by dimension, or you might even look at question level data as well, depending on what your goals are within your school or your district. So one example of participation leaders in a county, they had shared surveys that all districts in their county were participating in these three surveys: a student, a staff, and a family survey. And what we did then is took the highest percentage of participation across the county and called out those districts. So you can see we've got some alias district names down here. We've got Boogie with 97% student, Douglas 95% on the staff, and Homeby 92% on the family survey, which is very high considering about a year ago we were calculating our national average of family participation in surveys was 22%. So 92% blows that out of the water. Something really cool to celebrate for that particular district. We also included a category for honorable mentions. And in this category, we called out William Unified for 87% participation on each of their surveys. So for students, staff, and families, they had 87% or greater participation, which was awesome to see across the board. So then moving on to favorability, we did this kind of the same thing, calling out the highest performers in terms of their overall favorability across all questions in a pulse. And so this county looked at 5 dimensions that address school climate and different SEL competencies for the students. So we saw an 83% favorability there. And then we saw 95% for staff and then 96% for family in the William Unified. And then for honorable mentions, we called out the average favorability for all of the districts that participated in the family survey was at 91%, which is incredibly high and exciting for those districts. So for every district that participated in the family survey to bring back to their teams to celebrate that they have this good engagement with their families that had given them feedback. Okay, so that said, another way that we celebrate the positive is looking at those glows and grows. So I had mentioned that we like to pull out those top areas where we see it's looking very positive versus there's maybe 2 areas of growth where we can work on either as a district or at a school level. And in this area, we did this for student, staff, and for families, but I'm giving you an example from the student survey at the county level. And after reviewing countywide trends for each of the dimensions, we then looked at what were the highest favorable questions and what were the lowest favorable questions. And you can see in this example for students, they perceived interactions with diverse cultures as positive. They perceived that adults treated all students respectfully. And then in the growth areas where we saw the lowest favorable responses from students, that students were needing strategies to calm themselves down and also needing support with problem solving strategies. So what we saw, and again, this data came from the benchmark or benchline, I'm sorry, your benchline report. So this was the first time the survey was administered. The second time around, we saw the same issues of growth, areas of growth that were needed for students. So that was informative, even if you didn't see growth across the districts in the county. For the county, that was something that they came back and began to have a discussion about what type of SEL curriculum are we using? Do we want to use something else? We have some additional supports available to us this year. Maybe this is a good time to explore another curriculum that has been made available to us. And we now have the data points showing us we haven't made progress from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. So that's one way to help think about your data after pulling from the reports. But I know this is kind of a high level example. I'm going to toss it over to Justin, who's going to show you where you might draw some of these data points from the summary and from the questions report.
Great. Well, thank you very much. And I'm go ahead and share my screen here. Yeah, so what I'm just going to briefly talk about for a few minutes here is some of the reports, starting with the summary report. And basically everything that Holly just said, you know, what questions are, or what questions are we answering or trying to answer in the different reports. So looking at some of the reports with the lens of you might be a counselor, you might be an admin, you might be an SEL coordinator, or you might be a teacher. So what are some of the reports and what do they look like, and how do we come to some of these conclusions? And so the summary report is just kind of like that overall really broad view of your data. So it's a great report. It's the first thing that you see when you click into Kelvin, and it gives you things like overall favorability, your participation rate, how many comments, how many questions, and then you'll see like these overall trends, and then we'll kind of dive into some of the dimensions. And what I'd like to do is kind of dive in and show you really briefly what the report looks like. Many of you have seen this report, but maybe you're not sure how to really use the report. And so that's what I kind of want to focus on. Holly mentioned like things like glows and grows. What are the trends? What are the comparisons? So if I were to click on this pulse here, I'm going to look at this SEL pulse that we have, social emotional wellness. So this is from our demo, but you could see the overall favorability. You see the overall participation rate. As I mentioned, you could see the comments, which I'll talk about in a second, which is a great way to get direct student feedback should you choose to enable comments. But if you look down below, what we're kind of looking for is these big trends, right? And the cool thing about Kelvin, and something that's pretty new, we added another filter. If you go up to the upper right-hand corner, you'll see we have this filter tab. And if you click on that button, you'll see that we added race and ethnicity. So these are some things that you can kind of focus in on in addition to your grade level. So for example, just to do a quick comparison, if we were to look at, let's say, third grade, and we apply these filters, we can see here's the overall favorability. We can see how it compares to the rest of the population here. So the students that I chose right here, the third grade, we could see that they're 74%, 74, 74. So they stayed the same, but looks like everybody else kind of went down. So that's an interesting thing that you might want to be thinking about. Okay, so third grade, it seems like they're pretty consistent. Whereas if I were to go back up to this filter and I were to change it, let's go with the seventh grade on the other end. And if I were to apply that, you can see there's a kind of a big dip here, 49%, and it went down from 59% the last time it was given. So it went from 66 to 59 to now 49. So that's, as we're trying to answer some of these questions, you know, what's going on? And so maybe I want to scroll down a little bit more and figure out, okay, what's going on with my seventh graders? And as you could see, these are the dimensions. And you might ask, well, what are dimensions? Well, in our system, a lot of the dimensions are under the like SEL categories. In this case, we have responsiveness, love and belonging, but it could be part of the Castle 5. It could be something, you know, like self-awareness or self-management, whatever it is that you want to track. So if there's something here in Kelvin that you want to track, you can actually create your own dimension and track that over time. So as we could see, it looks like it dropped about 3 points here. And if I were to click on this to find out a little bit more and investigate, I could see, okay, here's the comparison from the last time it was given and versus the overall. And if I scroll down a little bit more, I can see the actual questions. So what's the story here? As I'm kind of looking and what am I trying to figure out here? So one of the things that kind of pops out to me in this example is we could see, even though that this is the lowest performing question or lowest performing dimension, my teachers care about me is 67%. That's pretty high. And then do you feel like you belong at this school? 55% could be higher, but we could see it actually went up a little bit here. But if we scroll down a little bit more, we see these two bottom questions: students respect one another at this school, and how safe do you feel when you're at school? You see that's at 36 and 31%. So there might be something going on here where teachers are being respected and students feel respected by the teachers, but they don't necessarily feel respected by each other. So these are the kinds of things that you can kind of glean from in the reporting. And if you were to drill in a little bit more, you can actually see the breakdown here. We see that it went down about 7%. And so now you can actually see the individual questions here of how it was calculated as favorable or unfavorable. But to answer some of those questions, let's say you're doing, you can kind of, if you have like a tier 1 and a tier 2 and a tier 3, as you're looking at that, you could be using these filters to kind of hone in on particular groups. For example, if you wanted to hone in on, let's say, your Asian students, and if I were to apply this filter, now you can see this updated here. And if I were to go back even to my summary report, I could see that comparison, and I can see that there's a pretty big disparity here compared to the rest. And that's the thing that's really great about using these filters, is that you can really hone in on these groups. And if there's a group here that is not being imported when we're getting your data, you can actually create these custom groups, and you can create tier groups. You can create all kinds of different things that you want to look for and focus in on a particular student. And I'll let Jill talk a little bit about the participation report, but that's something that you can also track in the participation and across all of our reports. And one thing I do want to mention as we kind of go into the report, it's kind of just flows from the kind of that bird's eye view into the more specific. And as you dive into the question, you'll notice here you can get to some comments. And I do want to just briefly mention the comment report. When you click on that, it gives you an overall sentiment. And one thing that is really cool about the comment report, and you can actually download all of the comments, and then you can put them into something like a word cloud. Now go ahead. And it could look something like this, right? So after you gather all of that data and you're kind of looking to answer some of these questions, you want to be looking for what's popping out, and, excited, stressed, tired, happy. These are really things that you can kind of really focus in on, and then move to the action piece. And then we'll talk a little bit more about like the toolbox and some of the other things that we have. But this is a great way to get direct student feedback when you enable the comments. You can actually read the comments, and then you could pop those comments into a word cloud and get an overall idea of, what's the overall sentiment of what's going on with these students. And for that, I'm actually going to pass it over to Jill to talk a little bit more about the participants report.
Actually, Justin, I'm going to take it from here, and we're going to cover the participation report first. And let me go ahead and share. We'll go back to that same report or same pulse that Justin was just in. And if you've used Kelvin before, you're probably familiar with participation report being the only report that's live, that's available when a pulse is live and collecting responses. So it can be great to track progress of who's participating, but you can also get some additional data points after a pulse is closed from this report. And for whether you're a district leader or school leader, one of the common questions might be, well, who didn't participate? So a really easy filter or sorting tool that you can use here is this status dropdown. So you'll notice here on this participation report, our purple skittle, we're at 93% participation. That's the aggregate across the entire district. But I want to know who didn't participate. So this status dropdown, I can select no response and see who hasn't responded. And as I scroll through, it'll give me some information for each student, what grade they're in, what school they're from. And so particularly if you're a school level leader or a counselor, you're probably very familiar with your list of students that you're going to see, and that may or may not be surprising to you who did not participate. But another powerful filter that we can use, and Justin touched on this on the summary and questions report, is the filters. So clicking on our filters button up here, let's just say as a district leader, I've been focused in on some DEI initiatives, looking at equity across racial groups. So I can select from my group, let's just see, did my Black or African American students participate at the same response as the rest of the district? And so if I click that and apply that filter, I can now see it's updated. It's still showing me 93%. So we're at parity for our Black and African American students. It gives me the total responses for that subgroup. And then I can go ahead and click through my no response list as well. As a school leader, I might want to just look at maybe I have a specific grade level, and let's just say I'm the principal at Yoshi Middle School, and I know that I've got 5th to 7th graders, but let's just see, how did my 7th graders participate this round? So let's go ahead and add that filter and see where we're at. And I noticed they actually only participated at 80% participation, which is still pretty high. But I may, as a school leader, look at that and go, okay, what's going on with my 7th graders? And I notice, oh, for the week that we ran this pulse, that was when my 7th graders were away on their annual camping science trip that they do up in the mountains. So no surprise, they only got one day to participate, and we still got really high participation. So these are some ways you can use this report outside of when the pulse is live. But if you're thinking about getting a broader overview of comparing by subgroup, that's where our heat map report can be really powerful. So let's go ahead and explore that a little bit more. And I'm going to remove our filters really quickly so we can get the defaults for our district level. And what you're going to see with a heat map report is this colorful table. And what it's meant to do is draw your eyes and draw your eyes to the differences of the lowest favorable responses at the top left with the orange, the bolder, the orange, and that will be the lowest favorable responses. And then splaying out to the bottom right, we have the highest favorable responses in bold blue. So what it will default to, you'll see it groups by subgroup data. So across our top columns here, you're going to see gender, race, and ethnic categories. And then we have in our rows, it defaults to your overall, so the full survey questions, and then the 2 dimensions. So it's at dimension level. We can also select by question level, and we can also divide out by subgroup. So let's just say, again, thinking about equity, I want to look at students' perceptions across race and ethnicity. And now I'm immediately drawn to these 2 groups. My American Indian or Alaska Native and Asian students are in the lowest favorable overall, so both overall, and then in this love and belonging dimension. So I can see my American Indian students are at 45% favorable compared to all students at 55 overall. But what's interesting too, I see that my white students also have kind of the lowest overall favorable for love and belonging, yet they have the highest, so 66% favorable for responsiveness compared to every other racial or ethnic subgroup that we've reported out here. I could also add an intersectional layer to my subgroups and maybe filter by gender. So let's go ahead and look at female students in our subgroups of race and ethnicity. And now you can see that it's updated. And overall, I still see that American Indian students, they're have the lowest favorability overall. So female American Indian students, and then female white students have the lowest, or they have 48% favorability in love and belonging. And now I see actually my female Asian students moved up. So they actually have higher favorability compared to just the aggregate of both male and female Asian students when I'm looking at those categories. We can also break that out by question, as I mentioned. So now I can see what were those lowest questions, which we saw was reflected back in our summary report. and at the question level, once we dove into dimensions, so you can see that student respect for one another is low here for American Indian as well as for white students. And then across the board, we saw really high favorability for every racial and ethnic subgroup for my teachers care about me. So, and then also in the request to speak to an adult and having at least one adult check in on them. So these are positive things that we can bring back to our team. So we know it's easy to get caught up in the negatives or where the lower favorable responses are, but we also want to point out to pay attention to where those higher favorable responses are. And then lastly, on this heat map report, I wanted to, let me clear our filters really quickly here. I wanted to show you where I might have looked for those leaders, the favorability and participation leaders. I, as a district leader, can come in and choose the school. And now I can see, you'll notice in the grayed out text underneath each school or district name, it gives me the overall percentage of participation here. And then you also see their favorability. So the overall, this row, this first row would show me that Yoshi is hanging out in the lower favorable response rates, and Douglas middle is over here at the height. They're at 72% favorability overall. So there's some easy ways to just get that zoomed out view and look at your data and pull out additional data points. Of course, with the filters and with the different groupings that you can sort your page or your heat map by, there's a lot of ways that you can look at your data and pull it. And again, depending on your focus, your vision, your shared goals at your district or school, that may determine the way that you want to look at your data and bring it back to your team. So that said, I'm going to pass it off to Ari to give us some practical tips of what can we do next with that.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Holly. And as you all saw on Holly's last slide, is we were dealing with that heat map report. So we want to provide you with some next steps to think about. And these are just 2 suggestions when you are leading a data walk, how you can kind of incorporate those next steps into something like a heat map. So as you saw in, with the different schools over there, so we had some high-performing schools. There was like Yoshi, Middle, and we had some low-performing schools like Boogie. And what you could actually do is create coaching opportunities. I'm an instructional coach, so I really enjoy thinking about what coaching opportunities can be created. But if you've got the ability to say, hey, Yoshi Middle, what practice did you do for your sense of belonging that you can maybe help out Boogie Middle with? And if you create this collaborative community of educators to help coach one another in areas that are weaker at, it creates this, you can really move the needle forward with social emotional learning. And this is what the heat map helps you do. It helps you really identify which schools, grade levels, whoever's doing well, what can you do and how can you take those best practice and coach another school or grade with that best practice. So that's example number 1, the coaching. And number 2 is you can also use the heat map as an opportunity to connect. And this is kind of like the grows, from the grows and the glows, is you can use this report as an opportunity to connect with schools and educators. So you can go and, say to an educator, let's say you've got a school or specific educator in a class, and your Asian students are reporting out a real sense of belonging. You can go and say, I see your school or your class has made Asian students feel seen. Well done. And this is an opportunity just to provide that positive feedback and really help out people with next steps. So these are just 2 ideas that you can use to kind of help move the needle with SEL. I'm going to pass it over to Jill to share a little bit about the participants report now, get a little bit granular with our data. So over to you, Jill.
Hi, everybody. It's good to see you all. I am going to go over the participants report. not the participation, but the participants, which will show the names of the participants that took the report and some really great data on each participant. So as you can see, I'm going to give you, this is a screenshot, and then I'm going to dive in live and show you some more details and things that you can do with the report. But I've highlighted, well, let me back up. So who might this report be for? And I would say if you're a district leader, you're a system admin, you're not going to dig in to different specific students. But think about it if you're a counselor and there might be a student coming into your office, you're a TOSA and you have a group of students that you're working with, or even you're a teacher and you want to judge the climate in your classroom. You can look at names. This 8 right here is that Derek answered 8 questions. He took 7 minutes and 36 seconds to take the pulse, and he had 1 comment. So Derek, in this case, is 57% favorability. But look over here, he declined 43%. So to me, that is a huge red flag. He's still okay. But what happened from the last pulse to this pulse that made his favorability decline so much? And then on the kind of opposite side, these look the same for Lorenz. He's got good favorability. He declined a little bit. But look over here. You can see that he only answered 6 out of the 8 questions. He took 31 seconds. So Lorenz was not putting a lot of effort or a lot of feeling into these questions. He obviously just clicked through and he had no comments. So I am going to show you the students report live here. And you can see that at the top, this is indicating that these are students. Right here is the title of the survey. And there's a few different filters that you can use on this report. You can change your administration windows. So from the 2nd to the 1st to the 3rd. You can also, as my colleagues have pointed out, use these green filters over here to filter by school, grade, race, ethnicity, gender, anything that you're pulling in from your SIS or your flat files. You can see the information on each student. Again, the questions answered, the time it took, if they had any comments, and right here is an example of a student that has requested to speak to an adult. And just as a reminder, this is permissions-based, this report. So you may or may not, sorry if I'm making you dizzy, you may or may not be seeing it right now, but it's permissions-based. So you can toggle it on and off for different roles in your school or your district. And I like to point out our friend Ubaldo over here, my last student that I'm going to look at. He answered all 9 questions. He took a lot of time to respond. He had 1 comment and requested to speak to an adult because probably this over here, he has 0% favorability and it's gone down 91%. So last time he took this pulse, he was 91%, had 91% favorability. So as a counselor, if he's sitting in my office, I'd really want to talk to him about this and see how he's doing and why the change from the last pulse to this one. So I'm going to send it over to Ari, who will talk about next steps after you're looking at this report.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Jill. So as Jill clearly highlighted, is you can get really granular with this participants report. You can go and track specific students, like she showed you Ubaldo, and you as a school counselor or someone, a class teacher, whoever it is, you are able to go and really understand, let's say Ubaldo over there, he had a loss. You can go check up on him and see how he's doing across these administrations. So this is something fantastic. And one of the real benefits of the participants report is MTSS tier grouping. So let's say you go and you create a castle aligned, what's it called, survey, it's a Castle Line Pulse, what you can actually go and do is you can toggle between self-awareness, self-management, whatever it is, and you can go and see if you've got a student who's really struggling with their self-management and their self-awareness and just feeling no sense of belonging. That student might be like Ubaldo and being MTSS Tier 3. And you can go and classify them, and that can help you out. So really going and using this report to filter by student, to think about your MTSS tier grouping is really, really helpful. And also, second thing which you can do is you can filter and track. So the teachers and counselors can look at their specific classes to understand how specific students are responding to interventions. If you say, for example, I've got intervention to help with self-regulation. Let's say you're doing some breathing activities and you're focusing on a couple of students. You can go and track how those students are doing on their self-regulation questions as you move through with your pulse survey. So this is really something that you can use the participants report for, to get that granular look into the individual. So those are really all our reports. And even though we've given you a couple of next steps, we want to discuss next steps more broadly, what you can do and what you can share with the people that you are leading a data walk for. So a couple of ideas which we had, and again, these are just some ideas. You can use them, take them. We just want to create a space for you to start thinking about how you're going to present through this data. The first thing you can do is ask for feedback. As Holly mentioned, is, getting your students involved. Maybe they putting them as part of the SEL team, or even asking students what they want to be asked. Understanding, hey, what do you guys want to be asked? What type of questions? Because your students know what's going on the ground. Asking that SEL team for feedback is really important, and they can help you with those next steps. Even reaching out to your community for next steps. And as we know, Kelvin has the ability to engage the staff and family, so you can get them part of this process and help you move the needle forward. Next is SEL implementation. Is you can think about SEL practices and interventions to specifically deal with the things that you are struggling with. As you know, we've got a toolbox in our system, but we've also got the ability to, we've got fantastic resources from Castle, from the Greater Good in Education, from all open source free resources that you can benefit from. Something I've also been using recently, which you may or may not like, is using AI, ChatGPT, Bard from Google, or any of these to actually think about next steps. And lastly is to reassess, is to think about setting your next pulse and what's that going to look like. Do you want to drill down on specific areas? Do you want to measure your interventions to see how well they're doing? And something which we're actually working with a school with recently is actually going and looking at their curriculum, their SEL curriculum, and sending pre and post surveys to actually try to help them out and understand, let's say they're doing a module on empathy, understand and assess kind of the students' understanding of empathy using Kelvin, and, see the effectiveness of this SEL curriculum. So these are a couple of things which can be done. And just to give you some real life examples, is a couple of weeks ago, we had Redlands District over in one of our webinars, and they were using this as a next step as an intervention. They had these QR codes posted around the school, around their district. This is, of course, for high school students, to speak to an adult. Okay, so they had this around. They realized that students weren't feeling so safe in their schools, so they did this as an intervention. Places like the bathroom, where they found from their qualitative data weren't so safe for the students, so they had this over here to connect them to an adult. And next, even in the same vein, if you want something a little less high burden, a little less high impact, or maybe you can go do something like this. Compliment a friend or a teacher. So you can have a Google form over there and you can share those compliments. So these are a couple of next steps and things you can take when you are leading a data walk, having these whole school or whole district-wide initiatives. And lastly is just to show you how I personally typed this into AI, and this is what I got. I wanted to understand how to build strong peer-to-peer relationships and increase a sense of safety in our schools. And I got some really great answers over here. promote inclusive and respectful behavior, foster a sense of belonging, implement anti-bullying initiative, peer mentoring programs. And what you can actually do with AI, which is fantastic, is I went and said, for example, peer mentoring program. I said, give me a lesson outline for a peer mentoring program. Some of it I liked, some of it I didn't. So I just cherry picked what I like, and it helps you out with that brainstorming and that creativity. So really using the tools at our disposal to try help with these SEL interventions and not feel at a loss. So lastly, just a summary of what we tried to do today is we really tried to discuss the idea of engaging the people that you are sharing the data with, using leaderboards, grows and glows, stakeholder engagement to hook your crowd. These are the things that we try and promote. And, Holly wonderfully showed you how you can use to kind of build in and engage that community to ensure there's change. Next, we've got those reports. We really encourage you. We know there were a lot of reports today, but for you to pick the relevant reports and to share the story you want to tell. Definitely with the reports, there's so much granularity that you can go into, but we really encourage you to take those reports, to look through them thoroughly, and to go through that qualitative data. It's really important. And, creating that word cloud, as Justin said, can be so exciting and so helpful to help you with some next steps. And lastly is thinking about those next steps, planning with your community, or you coming up with some next steps to try help that. And we really encourage you to track those using Kelvin and just make a difference in your school. So that's really what we've got to share today. We always happy to help you as a team build those data walks for you specifically in your specific context. But we want to open it up now to any Q&A that you might have. Feel free to post questions in the chat, or feel free to come and speak to us. But just before we jump in today, we want to say a massive thank you from the Kelvin team. We are always happy to serve and to help you, and especially with a whole new group of people coming in from the California deal that we have got going. We're really excited to serve broader communities and help you just get great SEL data, understand it, and take action. So we're going to open it, come back over here to our Q&A, and the floor is open to everyone else. If there's anyone from the Kelvin team who wants to share and jump in anything that we might have missed, please feel free to do it now.
Yeah, I'll just make a note. Jimmy put in the chat, you accidentally gave credit to Redlands. I guess it was Snowline School District we're referring to, shared that, but that's okay. We have a lot of great customers doing awesome work in their district, so it's easy to mix them up sometimes because we're learning from all of our districts.
I think I cut some slack because I'm not from California, so can cut me a little bit of slack. I'm learning.
I mentioned
Growth
Redlands.
mindset.
I mention Redlands a lot because my daughter goes there and I graduated from Redlands and my sister teaches there. So that's probably why Redlands is in your mind. But yeah, no big deal.
Fantastic. So if anyone wants to come off mute and raise your hand, we can take those questions. Also, if anyone would like to think about how they could specifically, if you've got any ideas that you'd like to share, please feel free to unmute yourself or share in the chat. Do you have any ideas or things that you've done in your data walk or that you are thinking about? We'd love to help and work with you. Cool. We've got a hand raised over here from Suzanne.
Hey, I know you mentioned this, but could you just refresh our memory that what the initial setup is, who has the permissions? So students do a pulse survey, and who has the default permissions to view it, and then what are the toggle on, toggle off permissions? I think that's come up as a question in the last week for me, so I could just get that solid.
CSM team, Holly, you want to grab this?
Yes, thanks, Suzanne. That's a great question. So in the Pulse creation, and I'll go ahead and share my screen. Let me. All right. So in the Pulse creation, so in any particular survey, let's just say it's a survey we've already sent out, a Pulse we sent out for student responses, where I can go to find out who has access to those results, I can come up here to this latest activity skittle, this yellow skittle, and then click the edit settings. So if you are not the Pulse creator, you're probably not going to be able to see this, or if you're not a system admin. So we'll come up here and see, and you'll notice the who do you want to share results with tells me who will have access to those reports. So in this case, district admins, we have a group of 7 district admins, 5 school staff, and 1 teacher, just for our example demo, that can see the results. So you would select the groups of who can see those particular reports here. And I think you might be curious what Jill had stated earlier about the toggle on or off. That for the participants report in general, your system admin or the project owner at the particular district, as we're setting up your Pulse system, will ask you, do you want the participants report to be available? And we can either toggle that on or off. However, there are additional settings that these system admins can make. So I'm going to come up here to the top right, my initial, the H, and go to my settings. And you can find that in this permissions link here. And so if I don't want teachers to see that participants report, I can put their group here in this limited access field. And so it then removes that participants report as well as the participation report for them. So they would then only see, if I come back to my Pulse, they would only see the summary, the questions, the comments, and the heat map report. So it would remove those participant, those personal identifier reports. I hope that answers your question.
Okay, that's great. So when you're saying like they could see what you just, the last thing you said, you could set it to see the summary, the heat map, and what was the third thing?
The comments and the questions.
Okay. So that, I mean, so that way someone could get the flavor of what's going on without individual students. So they would still, that part would still stay confidential, but they'd get the overall. And they could do that. Could a teacher do that for their students only, like just get the heat map for just their students?
Yeah, so everything is permissions and role based. So a teacher will only see reports for students that are rostered to them. So they won't see any data for the rest of the school or other teachers' classes.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Fantastic. I think we all good. I think, yeah. And, but you know, you can reach out to us at hello@kelvin.education at any time. And we're always here to serve you and to help you out. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. It's fantastic to see you all. And we hope you have a wonderful day and a wonderful end to the rest of the school year. Ooh.